Hey there, guys. I think we're finally ready to get started with the next section of our book, Chickadee by Louis Erdrich. I hope you guys are having a good time listening to the first section and had a chance to look at some of the study questions I shared with you. Look toward the end of the week for a vocabulary exercise, which I think we can have some fun with, but you'll have to decide for yourself and let me know what you like. Okay, let's get started. We left them off after a bit of a rescue was done when Chickadee's dad fell in the ice, but they got out and they got their meat for the winter and they had a great time butchering it up together. Now we are going to go to chapter 4 and look at what happens next in the life of Chickadee and his family. Chapter 4, Small Things. Winter and spring went back and forth that year. Nokomis said that the spirit of winter was struggling harder than usual to keep his claws of ice on the world. Still, the maple sap began to run one warm day, and the family was ready. They had already made camp at the same great stand of sugar maples where the twins were born. Chickadee watched his namesake hop from twig to twig in the branches of the sugar maples. He had managed to sneak away from the close watch of his mother. He had evaded his father, ditched his grandmother. He had hidden from his aunt, his uncle, his grandfather, and even his twin. There was nobody there to tell him to keep hauling sap from the trees. Haul more sap! Haul more sap! More sap! But the real reason he'd snuck away was that he'd heard the old man Jeguk laughing at him. Every year Jeguk came to Sugar, sometimes bringing his brutish sons. Jeguk watched everyone work, but did nothing himself. He just complained until someone gave him sugar to quiet him, and every year the old man's taunts and jeers grew worse. Look at that weakling. He's scrawny like his namesake. Chickadee's face burned with shame when he heard that, and he stumbled. He spilled some sap from the macaque he was carrying. The old man gave a mean laugh. Chickadee had hauled macaque after macaque of sap from the taps in the trees to the great boiling kettles, taking care every time not to splash himself or spill. Now the mean remark made him clumsy with embarrassment. He had done nothing wrong, he thought with fury. Of course, every so often he had paused to drink the strengthening and delicious, faintly sweet sap, but everyone did that. Sap was a spring tonic. He'd been a good worker and did not deserve this old man's comment, so he'd sneaked away. Couldn't a boy have some respect? And a minute or two for rest? Couldn't a boy have a little while to lay down in last year's newly warmed, fragrant maple leaves? Couldn't a boy spend a little time gazing into the swaying tops of the maples? Chickadee's thoughts turned darker. He didn't really mind the work. It was that mean old John Jeguk whom he wanted to get away from. A fitting name for a cranky old person. John Skunk. It was Jeguk who called him scrawny. Jeguk who picked on young boys with his nasty temper, ruining the good time they had running wild and sneaking bits of sugar or bannock or the choicest bits of meat. Jeguk was always there to point them out, to catch them at their tricks, to scream out, "There they go! Catch 'em!" Yes, it was Jeguk who embarrassed him. Jeguk who always got them in trouble. Even worse, the old man had those two powerful sons who enjoyed trouble just as much as their father. But for a moment, Chickadee was hidden from the old man's eyes and everyone else's eyes, behind a small hillock of stone. And there he continued watching his namesake. The chickadee had begun its spring song, which was a sweet and lilting song, not the mischievous scolding of winter. Every spring when this happened, Chickadee felt a wash of happiness come over him. It was a promise of warmth, food, berries, summer, swimming, and fun. But this time as he listened, he heard old Jeguk's words. Scrawny? Am I scrawny? Are you a weakling, my namesake? As he watched his tiny namesake hop from twig to twig, Chickadee felt disappointed for the first time. Why couldn't he have a protector like the bear or the lynx or the caribou or the eagle? Why was he singled out by such an insignificant little bird? He had a sudden thought that appalled him. He would be a grown man and still be called Chickadee. What kind of name was that for a powerful warrior? He groaned. Oh, my namesake, why did you choose me? Suddenly, the little bird flew away. Chickadee turned over and closed his eyes. He sensed the great, strong roots of the maple trees drawing water from the earth and sweetening it with their own sugar. He should have felt joy. But he was laughed at, overworked, unappreciated, and deserted even by his namesake. His eyes stung with pity for himself. "Ah, there you are!" Chickadee sighed and sat up, brushed the leaves from his hair. At least it wasn't old Jeguk who'd found him. It was Nokomis, which was not so bad. She was very good at getting around with her little walking stick, and she never told him what to do. His great-grandmother was so old that she had dim eyesight, though uncannily she never mistook him for his twin the way other people did. She put her hand in his little buckskin bag for a treat. "Did I give you a sugar lump, my boy?" "Oh no, my Nuku, not yet." Chickadee hid the sugar lump he already had in his cheek and put out his hand. "You are a good boy," said Nuku, "but you can't fool me, Chickadee. I'll give you extra anyhow. And here, give the other lump to your brother. What are you doing here? This is my secret place." Chickadee was amazed that his great-grandmother, who tottered around and couldn't see or hear very well anymore, had noticed his lumpy cheek, and more, that she had a secret place. Why would she need a secret place? "I used to come here when I was a little girl," said Nuku, setting herself against the rock. "We Anishinaabe have been coming here since time began. Did you know that these trees are the children of the old spirit trees who understood us and told us how to gather their water and boil it into syrup and sugar so long ago?" "Gaween, Nuku." Chickadee was more curious than most boys, who might have run off right after getting the extra treat. "Why have you hidden yourself away?" Nokomis asked. Although she was ancient, his great-grandmother always saw into his heart. Because she always listened to him, Chickadee always told her the truth. "Old John Jeguk said that I was a scrawny, a weakling, just like my namesake." "What?" Great-grandmother's eyes filled with cloudy fire. Her back straightened. She thumped her walking stick on the ground. "This is very, very bad, my boy, very bad," she cried. "Doesn't the old fool realize that you must never insult the Chickadee?" "Oh?" Chickadee remembered that he himself had been disrespectful to the little bird, and that it had flown away. Uneasily, he scratched his head and sat closer to Nuku. "Why is it that you must never insult the Chickadee?" he asked in a low voice. His great-grandmother gave him a surprised look. "Don't you know? Haven't you realized yet? Small things have great power." Chickadee was struck by this. He sat back on his heels. Small things have great power sounded good, but made no sense. "But I am scrawny. I am a weakling, and the Chickadee is little too. It has no teeth, no claws. What can it do?" "The Chickadee stays awake all winter in the cold," said Nokomis. "He survives on the smallest seed. He is a teacher. The Chickadee shows the Anishinaabe how to live. For instance, he never stores his food all in one place. He makes caches in various places. He never eats all of his food at once. We do that too. The Chickadee takes good care of his family. The mother and the father stay with their babies as they fly out into the world. They stick together like the Anishinaabe, and there are other things too. The Chickadee is always cheerful, even in adversity. He is brave and has great purpose, great meaning. You are lucky to have his name." Chickadee put his hands on his face. "Lucky? Great-grandmother, I insulted the Chickadee. I told the bird he was a weakling. I asked why he had chosen me." Great-grandmother now looked extremely grieved. "What can I do?" She rummaged in her carrying bag and took out 3 hazelnuts. Giving them to Chickadee, she said, "Crack these into small pieces and place them on this rock. I will put tobacco at the base of the rock. Then we wait." Chickadee followed her instructions, and just as she had said, they waited. The sun went behind a cloud. The shadows grew cold. The Chickadee did not appear. Finally, Nokomis spoke out loud. "Oh, Chickadee, please accept our offering. Your namesake is young and had his feelings hurt. He did not wish to offend you. Please don't reject him. He needs your counsel." "I am very sorry," whispered Chickadee. "Please come back to me." Now it seemed to him that all his life he'd heard the chickadees call near him. His namesake had always been around looking after him. It was strange not to hear that voice, strange only to hear the distant cry of humans and other birds. A shadow fell across his heart. "Where are you?" Chickadee whispered. All of a sudden, there was a swift motion, a small flutter, and the chickadee came down onto the rock. It did not peck up the nuts, but stood intently at its namesake, then at great-grandmother. She stared back just as hard at that bird. They regarded each other for what seemed like the longest time to Chickadee. Then the bird decisively pecked up a bit of the hazelnut and flew to a nearby twig. It held the nut against the twig with its small black claw and ate it quickly. Then it flew right back for another piece. "We can go now," said Nokomis, sighing in relief. Chapter 5. Sons of Jeguk. As Chickadee and Nokomis walked back to join their family, they passed John Jeguk sitting on a stump. He leaned on a long, thick stick. As the two passed, he stuck the stick out right in the path of Nokomis. He meant to trip her, and his snaggle-toothed grin showed that he would enjoy seeing her sprawl at his feet. "Nuku, watch out!" cried Chickadee. She stepped forward. Crack! Instead of tripping over the old man's walking stick, Nokomis used her own. Her walking stick came down on John Jeguk's head, smashing down his lumpy, frayed, treasured top hat. Yow! The hat smashed down so hard that it ripped. Jeguk's ears stuck out the fragile sides. The old man looked so comical that Nokomis and Chickadee couldn't help laughing. Once they started, and once John Jeguk began to stamp and bray, they laughed even harder. They laughed so hard that tears came into their eyes. Old John Jeguk raised his stick in the air and threatened them to run them down. In his rage, he began to sputter and choke on his own fury. As Nokomis and Chickadee stumbled away, they had to hold their aching stomachs. They were still weeping with laughter when they reached the family camp. Nokomis sat down and tried to regain her breath. "What is it? What happened?" Omakayas took her grandmother's hand, alarmed, and patted it anxiously. Nokomis tried to speak, but every time she spoke the name of John Jeguk, she burst out laughing again. She pointed at Chickadee. "He will tell you!" she cried. So Chickadee told the story of how John Jeguk tried to trick Nokomis, and how she had known exactly how to use her stick, even though she was half blind. Chickadee described Jeguk's hat, and Omakayas could not help laughing too. That hat was Jeguk's symbol of prestige. Chickadee told his family how Jeguk had tormented him that day, and how he'd gone off to hide. McCune especially was immediately infuriated by the insults the old man had given to his brother. "You're not a weakling. You're strong and bold like me." The truth was that both twins, who had started out so tiny, had never grown as big and strong as most boys their age. John Jeguk knew this, though Omakayas thought Omakayas when she heard the names he'd called Chickadee. But he should never have shamed her son. She was glad that Nokomis had given the old man a sore head and had ruined his pride and joy, his hat. But even as Omakayas was thinking this, McCune was thinking the same thing. He was thinking how unfair it was of Jeguk to insult his brother, and how very bad it was that he tried to trip Nokomis on the path. She could have been hurt. It showed a lack of respect. "There is only one way to make him respect us all," muttered McCune. He slipped away. It was dusk, and a slim boy could hide near the old man's shelter. There was still time to play one more trick on the old man, a trick that would make him leave Nokomis and Chickadee alone for good. That night, while everyone was asleep, McCune crept into Jeguk's tiny bark shelter. First, he untied the old man's dangling moccasin strings. He was sleeping in his moccasins, so this was a very difficult task. It took McCune quite a while to undo the string. Then he had to wait while the old man snuffled and snorted and turned over in his sleep. Finally, he managed to tie the moccasins to each other. While he was doing this, he had another idea. McCune took a piece of loose birch bark off a tree. Then he slipped back into his family's camp and crept up to the fire, which was banked for the night, and gave off just enough warmth for the family to sleep by. "I'll be right back," said McCune. With a stick, he reached into the pot and smeared a large lump of fat on the piece of birch bark. McCune sneaked furtively and quickly back to Jeguk's shelter, which rattled with his snores. He leaned in and smeared the back of the old man's jacket with the fat. Then McCune went back to his own sleeping corner inside his family's wigwam and fell asleep in great satisfaction. He'd revenged his family, upheld his brother's honor, and he felt certain that John Jeguk would have only the greatest respect for his grandmother from now on. Late the next morning, at the time when John Jeguk usually rose, there was a roar of hilarity from the end of the sugar camp. McCune gave a sign to Chickadee, and both ran over to see what the excitement was about. To their satisfaction, John Jeguk was wiggling out of his shelter like an earthworm with the hat pulled low over his ears. His ankles were bound together with his moccasin laces. As he approached the entrance, dozens of mice, which had been feasting on the fat that coated his jacket, jumped up and scurried away. The mice had eaten most of the fabric along with the fat, and when the strings were entangled and he was able to stand, the halves of his fancy coat fell abruptly off his arms. The mice had eaten the entire back away. Now, the whole camp howled with laughter. John Jeguk had been mean to nearly everyone around him, and there were few who had much sympathy for him. But as he stamped and roared and swore that he would get even, he woke his big angry sons, who had ridden up to the camp the day before on shaggy brown horses. Whether or not those two hard-faced men had sympathy for their father was impossible to tell. They watched impassively as their father raved and swore at the pieces of his coat. They did not help him, but their cold, narrow eyes passed over the other people one by one, and many of those who laughed fell silent. These two sons, Batiste and Batiste, were silent, crafty, massive men who liked no one better than each other. They trusted only each other. Having been starved and beaten by their father in their youth, they came to his aid only for form's sake. They looked around at the gathering to ascertain who had embarrassed their father, not because they loved him, but because they loved revenge. A pall fell over everybody at the camp, and Nokomis stamped away, muttering that the gathering would be ruined now. With these two hard men watching everything that took place, the ease and pleasure of the undertaking, the taste of the sugar after a hard winter, and the sharing of the maple's gifts would be spoiled, she said. She had no idea that things would be worse, much worse than that. Later that day, as Chickadee and McCune again hauled macaque after macaque of sap to the giant boiling kettles, they tried to avoid John Jeguk and his two sons. Luckily, their mother was engaged in the difficult but delightful task of making sugar. Both boys put down their macaque and stayed near to help her, and helped Nokomis, knowing that their reward would be a cone or two of sugar as a treat. Omakayas knelt beside a maple log that Anamikins had scraped and smoothed into a sugaring trough. Nokomis ladled syrup, which had been boiled until it was so hot the surface crumpled like a thick skin, onto the heavy tray. Then the two women took turns working it back and forth with wooden paddles carved especially for this task. This was very hard work. The women kept the paddles constantly in motion and stirred the syrup fast, until it magically crystallized into lovely, sandy-colored grains. But even though they were panting and their arms had begun to ache, both were smiling. The scent of the new sugar was so pleasant, and behind them the kettles of bubbling sap and hot fires exuded such a fine aroma. Birds fluttered and sang out high in the branches. The cold, fresh breeze came from Jawanang, the south, and the bringer of green life to the Anishinaabe world. A visitor sat watching them on a stump, asking questions from time to time. He spoke French or English, so Nokomis couldn't understand him. But Omakayas, who knew and understood the languages from listening to their father, answered the man in the black robe. Mekadewi ka na ye wi nini, black robe. That's what Omakayas called the curious man. Catholic priests were known as black robes. They dressed in the same curious costumes and carried a certain book. They sometimes pulled out anaminamasag, or what some called praying berries or praying ropes. Their hands moved on these strings as they recited the same words over and over. They were interesting people and sometimes took the trouble to learn the Anishinaabe language. This priest lived as the Anishinaabe did and traveled with those who had moved onto the plains. He was known to them all as Father Ganin. This priest had come to the sugaring camp in order to learn about how the Ojibwe made their delicious sugar. This priest had traveled from the prairies past the Pembina Hills with the two hard sons of Jeguk. On the way, he'd hoped to convert them, but seeing as all the way they'd fought, swore, hit their horses, drank whiskey, and insulted each other long into the night, it was evident he had failed. Chapter 6. The Way It Happened. Chickadee and McCune were taking a well-deserved rest. They were making sure they got their rest by hiding behind the rocks again. Slowly they licked the cones of sugar that Nokomis had given them. "Brother," said McCune in a worried voice, "how many family and friends do we have here?" "Let's count," said Chickadee. The twins tried to count everyone in their family. Some were missing, though. Anamikins, Fishtail, and Two Strike were hunting. "And how much family does Jeguk have?" asked McCune. "Just his sons, but they're worth several warriors apiece." "That worries me," said Wakuns, "because I am the one who tied that old man's moccasins together and made a feast for the mice out of his jacket. I had to take revenge for Nuku and for you, my brother." "Miigwech, thank you," said Chickadee with a grin. Chickadee was not surprised by his brother's confession. His twin was a clever joker, and this prank had worked all too well. "I am just worried that I have got us all into trouble," said McCune. "I wish that Two Strike, our Day-Day, Fishtail, or even Uncle Quill was here. They could take on 10 Jeguks. I didn't know that Babiche and Batiste would show up." "Did you see the way they looked at us?" "No doubt they have their suspicions." "I think that Jeguk told them about the problem with his hat," said Chickadee. "His hat will never be the same. I wonder what he's wearing today. No fancy hat, no trader's topcoat." The twins lay back against the rock and gazed into the waving tops of the maple trees. Lost in their silent thoughts, they did not notice the rustling of footsteps. Then suddenly, there were voices, grown men's voices. Babiche and Batiste sat down on the rock. There was the scrape of a striker, and then the wafting odor of tobacco. As the two men puffed on their pipes, the twins shrank against the rock. They hardly breathed. Their hearts beat frantically. McCune closed his eyes in fear, but Chickadee kept one eye open. "One of those two scrawny puppies has shamed our father," Babiche said at last. "We should catch him and throw him into the soup pot," said Batiste. "Ha ha ha ha," laughed Babiche. "They wouldn't make more than a few mouthfuls from men like us." "Look down at my leg," said Batiste. "These muscles are so big I could outrun a horse." "You are mighty, my big brother." "My brother," Babiche agreed. "But just look at my fist. It is so hard it could smash a rock." "Your fist is hard," said Batiste, "and as large as your own head." "Ha ha ha ha," laughed Babiche. "You are very funny, my brother." McCune opened one eye and looked into Chickadee's open eye. The twins silently agreed that Babiche and Batiste weren't funny. "Think," said Babiche, blowing out a cloud of smoke, "of what we could do with these worthless puppies with your leg and my fist. Or my two fists and your head. Or your two legs and my one fist. Or if we squeeze them between our rock-hard bellies." "Ha ha ha ha," laughed Babiche. "You are funny, my brother." "All we need is to get them alone with nobody watching." Chickadee's and McCune's eyes opened wide in alarm. Then they felt the two massive men moving above them, leaning over them, and they saw the craggy faces of the brothers very near. Suddenly, both brothers sucked hard on their pipes and then blasted smoke out into the boy's eyes. How it burned! Although blinded, the twins leapt up anyway, fast as rabbits. They jumped, fell, scurried, blundering into the trees and tripping over branches as they fled. Behind them, the powerful big brothers flexed the muscles of their arms and compared their fists again, smoked their pipes, and laughed and laughed. Chickadee and McCune reeled back to the safety of their camp to find the women in the family were finishing their work. They crept into the wigwam to hide, hoping that the family would leave the camp very soon. It seemed they would. Once the nights and the days were warm, and the sun increased its strength, the day of sugar bush were over. Omakayas wrapped the tawny box of maple sugar in birch bark and tied the bark down with split jack pine root. After the sugaring, the family planned to return to the islands in the Lake of the Woods, where they would hunt furs and build their stores of food throughout the summer. They all looked forward to warm days of fishing, berry picking, gathering medicines, and swimming. But the two sons of Jeguk had something else in mind. Even as the other families gathered their blankets and pots and prepared to move, Batiste and Batiste sat on the rock. There, the pipe smoke drifting upward in curls, they hatched an inglorious plan. "We are important," said one brother. "That is true," said Batiste. "We carry the mail on our horses. Everyone treats us with respect." "But our shanty, it is a mess," said Batiste. "I was thinking how nice it would be to have a wife." "A wife is too much trouble," replied his brother. "Besides, we need two. We couldn't share a wife." "Ha ha," said Batiste. "You are funny, my brother. What we need is a servant." "A servant! Now that is a fine idea. We are important enough to have a servant, but where would we get one?" asked Batiste. "I have an idea," said Batiste. "These two insulting rabbits who look exactly alike. What if one disappeared?" "We might get in trouble with that whole family," said Batiste. "Oh, I very much doubt it, my brother," said Batiste. "Remember, they have two the same. They have an extra. Why should they care? Ha! You're very funny. But perhaps you are also right." Late that night, while the whole camp slept, the two men crept to the birch bark shelter where the twins dreamed of all they would do back on their island. With a stealth surprising for his size, Batiste wiggled his hands and arms underneath the loose walls. He seized the twin closest to him, put his rough hand over the boy's mouth, and yanked him so quickly out under the birch bark wall that the other sleepers were not stirred. Ever since she was a young girl, Omakayas had been visited in her dreams by a protective spirit, a bear woman. That night, the furry and powerful bear woman appeared. Omakayas dreamed that the bear woman crawled beside her and curled up, speaking sleepily, for she was only now stirring from her winter hibernation. "Omakayas, my child, your little ones are in danger. The hunters are coming." Omakayas woke with a start and stirred up the fire just enough to see. There was Nokomis, curled in her rabbit skin blanket, and there was Zosie sleeping flat on her back underneath the trade blanket. McCune's was a lump entirely wrapped in another blanket, and next to him there was a lump too. But something about the lump did not look right. Omakayas stirred the little fires into flames, causing Nokomis to sit up, blinking. "Chickadee?" Omakayas went over to Chickadee's blanket, felt around the spot, and noticed that the birch bark wall was pulled up. At first she thought he had gone out to the bushes. She waited. Nokomis turned over, went back to sleep. Chickadee did not return. Omakayas' heart jolted in fear. "My bear woman has spoken the truth." She woke McCune's. "Mama?" He rubbed his eyes. "Where is your little brother?" McCune leaned over the empty blanket and tried to focus his sleepy eyes. "Dibby, I don't know where." In an instant, Omakayas was out the door, hoping that Chickadee had only slipped out on some midnight errand with a cousin. She went to every lodge, waking everyone. None of them had seen Chickadee. Now the whole camp was out, including Zosie and McCune's. They called out for Chickadee. They made torches of pitch-tipped branches. Father Ganin crawled out of his blanket and tried to help. Everyone searched the area. Everyone, that is, except Batiste and Batiste. John Jeguk had crept out to poke his walking stick here and there in the leaves. "Old Jeguk, where are your sons?" asked Nokomis. "I don't know," said Jeguk. You know something, said Nokomis. Those 2 sons of yours have stolen Chickadee.
Stolen? Why, you couldn't give away that worthless boy, said the man. Nobody would want him.
Then where is he? Said Nokomis. And where are Batiste and Batiste? Answer me.
My sons have gone back to the river, replied Jeguk. They will catch some golden eyes when the river breaks up. They were hungry for golden eyes.
Hungry for fish in the middle of the night? Nokomis made ready to hit the old man again with her walking stick, but he threw himself on the ground and cried,
Pity me! I have no one! My sons didn't even take me along!
Oh, you pity yourself enough, said Nokomis. Father Ganin came over and helped the old man sit up. Where are your sons? He also was suspicious, especially since he'd failed to convert Batiste and Batiste. In spite of his forgiving nature, he suspected that they were unredeemable fellows and were even capable of wickedness. He made Jeguk sit still and listen while he said a few quick prayers. Nokomis hobbled over quickly to Omakaius, who was examining the sets of footprints outside the wigwam. The footprints led straight to where the 2 brown horses had been tethered. Omakaius fell down on her knees, grasping Dede's hand. Oh, Dede, they have stolen Chickadee! Dede's face was suffused with fury. My daughter, he said, we will pursue them. We will find our boy. The twins were favorites of his, favorites of everyone. Everyone knew how, in the stories, twins helped to create the Ojibwe world. Twins were considered blessed. To know twins, to be in the family of twins, or even the presence of twins, was good fortune. Chickadee and McCunes were much loved. To divide twins was an evil. I will track down Batiste and Batiste, said Miquam. Fishtail and Anamikins will follow the path as well. When Two Strike hears of this, she'll take it hard. We'll catch up with them. Don't worry, daughter. In a gesture rare for him, Miquam put his arm around Omakaius' shoulder and tried to comfort her weeping. She in turn held Macoons. Poor Macoons had never been separated from his brother, and he was crying with all his heart. Nothing would be right for anyone until Chickadee returned. Okay, that is the end of that chapter. And next week, we're going to start Chapter 7. Don't forget, look at our Google Classroom for the latest study questions, for a review of the chapters we've read, and especially that vocabulary quiz. You guys have a great afternoon.